4 minutes after 12 is the time. One of my oldest and dearest friends, who, like me, was in receipt of more corporal punishment when we were at school together than almost anybody else in the class, ended up as a primary school teacher. And I was glancing at his Facebook page last week after the media got hold of the appointment of a chap called Tom Bennett to a working group looking at behaviour management in British schools, and I think his post was something along the lines of, oh, they'll be appointing somebody to teach me how to wipe my own bottom next. The suggestion was that teachers don't need help instilling discipline in classrooms, and yet Tom Bennett was probably as unhappy about some of the media coverage as my friend the primary school teacher was. He's here now, let's find out. A baptism by fire, really. First of all, you were appointed as a czar, that dread word, beloved of politicians. You were described as a nightclub bouncer. Not strictly true.
Sure, and now a bottom wiping czar.
Yes,
fabulous.
well, hang on, don't get ahead of yourself. I don't, there might be other hats in the ring for that
job. I can only
job.
dream, James.
I mean, I suppose in strictly technical terms, it's quite a dry appointment. You're chairing a working group looking at behaviour management. But let's begin at the beginning.
Sure.
How do they happen upon a chap like you to do a job like that?
Well, I mean, I've been teaching for about 12 years, and I guess the key question is, how does anyone get to be an expert in behaviour management? You know, there's no course you go on, literally, you know. It's, what do you do, a psychology degree? But no, what you do is you teach in classrooms. And I've been writing about behaviour for about 10 years because it's been such a bee in my bonnet that teachers these days aren't really trained consistently enough to be good at running a classroom. And you'd think that that'd be one of the main things that a teacher would be trained in. You know, it's absolutely essential to the craft. And
well, what shocked you then when you first arrived in a classroom? What were you expecting and what did you encounter?
Yeah, I mean, my last experience before being a teacher was being a student, and then I left for about a decade and worked in all kinds of industries, and then came back. And I was amazed that we hadn't quite got it licked yet. You know, I mean, this is something we've been doing for thousands of years. Now, I mean, it's really, really hard getting challenging classes on site, but it's also not impossible. And what really amazed me was that teachers weren't trained enough to do it properly. In some places they were. I'm not knocking all training institutions, but in a lot of places they weren't.
And I should stress at this point, any teachers listening or 0345 6060973 is the number that you need to do that. You can also, I think, can you see us? Are we live at the moment? So you can also see us in case any discipline issues break out in the course of my encounter with Tom. You can see it live at the website lbc.co.uk. This is, you won't be surprised to learn, one of the hardy perennials of my job, talking about discipline in classrooms.
Sure.
It was even before I became I mean, both of my children are primary school age at the moment, and some of the things that we hear are remarkable. I mean, little things which we'll no doubt get onto, like the fact that a lot of kids are allowed to have mobile phones in classrooms and things like that.
Don't start me on that.
Well, I will, but not just yet. I guess the difficulty people have is generational, isn't it? Because all you can do is think of your own school days, and my school days were typified by quite a lot of brutality in the classroom.
Yeah, sure.
And yet at the same time, when I was thinking this morning about what to talk to you about, I was trying to work out what the teachers could control a class had in common, and I couldn't actually think, because I would have an English teacher who was a fragile lady in her 50s, and then I'd have a French teacher who was a former England rugby fullback, and I had a maths teacher who devised some cruel and unusual punishments, and they were all teachers who, and I hated maths, but for him I was brilliant at it. They were all uniquely different people. There wasn't an abiding theme, and that, I suspect, is why people are a little suspicious of the idea that you can teach discipline to adults. You can teach a teacher how to control a classroom. Yeah,
I mean, there's a bigger issue going on behind this, which is societal. The kind of brutality you're talking about was obviously a terrible, terrible thing. And I'm old enough to remember when children used to get the cane and the belt and so on, and, you know, good riddance to that. And so we've reevaluated the relationship between kids and adults as a society, not just in schools.
Yes, we have.
Which is good. But as part of that conversation, we've also slightly lost our nerve as adults. I think Frank Ferretti, the sociologist, calls this a crisis of adult authority. He says we've lost our nerve slightly about how we actually talk to children. And a lot of newer teachers I train are very uncertain about, do they have the authority to speak to children, and do they have the authority to direct them, and, you know, am I allowed to tell them off? You know, and a lot of teachers have forgotten this kind of craft and this way you talk to children. And you're absolutely right to say that different teachers have got massively different ways of doing it. And you're right, I remember the quiet teacher who used to rule with an iron rod, but didn't.
Just by raising an eyebrow.
Just looked at you and spoke softly. And I guess the kind of thing we're looking at the working party is to try and see what things are universal. What things can you teach all teachers about all children, or almost all children, because they're humans? And what things are context dependent? Because I was terrible at behaviour management until I started to, bizarrely enough, started to tell the kids stories. That was my way in with them.
So what was happening before that then?
Well, before that, I was essentially a kind of a totem pole for the children as they would run rings around me. I went in, as many teachers did, thinking that if I just loved them enough, if I just thought, I really care about you guys, and I love my subject, then they're going to come round for me. As if, oh, I get you guys, I really understand you. But it's not like that at all. Children, in order to behave for you, have to develop a relationship with you. Now, that relationship takes time, and you can do it in lots of different ways. But one of the main ways in which most teachers can do it with most kids is by setting out clear boundaries, saying, this is what I expect of you. And that's a good thing. Because not only are you restricting them from doing things they might naturally do, but you're teaching them when those things aren't necessarily in their own interests. And eventually, if they see that you care about them, they start to come round. The vast majority of them do anyway.
You mentioned that when you returned to teaching, you couldn't believe we got it licked. One of my old classics teachers will be delighted. I can remember Thucydides said something about 500 years before Jesus was born about the world. The world is all going wrong. Parents no longer obey their children, and that was 2,500 years ago.
Yeah.
So in a sense, there's a timeless issue here that may be unsolvable.
Yeah, I'm going to stick my neck out here, and I'm going to be absolutely chopped down for saying this. I think that quote's a fraud.
You don't think he ever said it?
I've heard that's invented. However, the good people of LBC world will probably correct me on that. Children have always been children. Children have always been characterised by early stages of compliance and later stages of rebellion as they establish who they are. Of course they have been. And what's astonishing for me is that in some instances, we've stopped teaching children about some of these really basic elements that they can then prepare for and counter.
And yet, I don't know, the child knows where the boundaries are, knows what's expected of her, knows this, knows that, knows the other, and still doesn't do it. Do you see the story about banning homework that one of the private school headmistresses said last week?
Yeah, that's one very complex research out there to suggest that the younger the child, the kind of less effective homework actually is. But as they get older, and we're talking more to the more examination ages, like Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, A-levels and GCSEs, that then homework starts to kick in as being more effective, but only if the homework itself is meaningful and useful. I mean, I often rant against homework. I think a lot of homework teachers set is often pointless, and it's done to tick boxes and just to keep schools happy. But homework can be really powerful, because it's a really good kind of subtle, soft tool of communicating with your kids, because when they give you back a really good bit of homework, you can then write things to them, and only they will read it. So it's a really, really subtle form of communication. But again, in its place, in its context.
I mean, you're not. The press are probably going to call upon you to do so, but you're not in the business of firing a magic bullet at the classrooms of Great Britain.
No, I confess I am out of magic bullets at this stage. As Ben Goldacre famously says, get complex social problems solved by a simple magic bullet. And behaviour is another one of those things, because it's all about human relationships, isn't it? And it took me years to work out how I should speak to a class.
I interrupted you. You mentioned storytelling.
Yeah, well,
I stopped you telling your story.
No, that's all probably for the best.
No, I'm interested.
Before my lessons become lectures. And children would be interested, and then I would use them to kind of leaven my lessons, and then gradually I would build up the relationship. But that was my way in, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it for any other teacher. And I'm not saying my stories were particularly good, but it was just my way in.
Yes.
And then I realised that actual fact, what I was doing with the stories was I was providing a kind of a safe environment for them to learn in. It was something they expected, something they got used to, and eventually it wasn't just me injecting a little bit of learning to try and leaven the stories. It became the other way around.
Caro suggests that they just need more bodies. They need more assistants in the classrooms to help teachers manage behaviour, giving the teachers more time and energy to actually teach.
I'm going to say not necessarily, simply because evidence suggests that between, say 18 and 30 kids in a classroom, it doesn't make that much difference as to how many bodies you've got in the classroom in terms of number of kids.
What, even 40, 50?
Well, because what you're talking about there is teacher-to-child ratio, aren't you?
Yes.
And when you have a class of, say, 4 children, right,
Yeah.
which doesn't really happen very often, unless you teach A-level in an unpopular subject, then you've got a very different learning experience. You know, you've got essentially a tutorial going on there.
Sure.
But once you get to kind of 9 and 10, it's not really much of a difference whether or not you've got 17, 18 or 19, because you're pretty much just handing out the same amount of time to kids. And then up to about, say, 30, you've got another kind of tipping point, and after that it becomes a lot more difficult to teach classes, because especially if you've got very challenging children. So it all depends on the types of children you have also as well.
Yeah, I understand that, and arguably, I suppose, in the context of discipline, the type of home that they come from. We'll get on to that next, I think.
Yeah, sure.
What role that plays. And of course, if you as a parent want to ask Tom anything, you can do. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. You've got a better chance of getting through in this hour than you will have in any of the other 15 hours that we spend together this week. But I want to specifically focus upon his field of expertise and the challenge with which he's been tasked by the Education Secretary. It's a working group looking at behaviour management, and I'm still going to stick my neck out and say that Thucydides quote was sound. So I will remind you that it's 2,500 years. I'll do it in Greek in a minute.
Yeah, please.
It's 12:15.
This is LBC.
So Jim and I have some news.
You're pregnant! I knew it! You're clearly starting to show. Congratulations, you!
No, we're moving house. Oh. Right.
There's an alternative route that's 3 minutes faster.
TomTom. Quicker journeys when you need them. Get the TomTom Go with real-time traffic information at Argos.
I'm Joanne Webb in the LBC Travel Centre. Well, it's ever so busy on the M25, anti-clockwise from junction 6 at Godstone to junction 5 at the M26, and that's following an accident, and one lane is closed. Now, also on the M25, you can't leave the clockwise M25 at junction 23 because a lorry's overturned on the slip road to the A1M. Ever so busy on the approach. Still very busy on the M23 northbound from junction 9 at Gatwick Airport, heading up towards the M25, and that was after an accident that happened earlier. Kennington Park Road still closed in both directions, being the Oval and Kennington Tube Station. That's because of that burst water main. In Southwark, there's been an accident on Southwark Street. It's eastbound between Blackfriars Road and Hopton Street. There are queues all the way back to London Bridge and back to Waterloo Bridge. On the trains, Great Northern services are now able to run to and from Moorgate, but with delays, and there are minor delays on the Central Line. Keeping London moving, your next travel update's in half an hour.
This is LBC.
I could be at home now. Maybe watching telly with the kids. Or I was thinking about going for a pint. Instead, I've punctured my lung and it's slowly filling up with blood. I'm going into cardiac arrest now. Silly place to overtake, really. Still, you live and learn, don't you? Don't you?
Motorcyclists, think. Don't ride too fast.
Transport for London. Every journey matters.
Purple bricks can save you thousands when you sell your house. So what do real people like Jenny Whitehouse say about us on Trustpilot?
Jenny said, excellent.
What's Steve Newton said?
Excellent.
Mrs. Riley?
Mrs. Riley didn't say excellent.
What did she say?
She said, woohoo, great.
Well, that's even better.
Excellent.
Visit purplebricks.com and book a free valuation.
Tradesman. Direct Line will beat any public liability insurance quote for the same cover. Can your insurance do that? Search Direct Line Public Liability Insurance. New customers only. Qualifying criteria apply. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
Hello. Come in, Sue. The gas man's just leaving. Bye, Derek.
I had British Gas round last week too. My engineer was so thorough.
Oh, I bet he wasn't as good as mine.
He called to say when he'd arrive.
Mine fixed the boiler in a jiffy.
Mine was so tidy.
Mine assembled my flat pack dining table and 6 chairs.
Really?
No, I made that one up.
To find out why 9 out of 10 of our surveyed home care customers would recommend us, call 0800 975 0999 or search British Gas.
Whenever you want, wherever you are. Listen live to LBC at home or in your car on FM and DAB digital radio.
Oh, I'm not your wife, mate. You can't talk to me like that.
No, she normally says that to me, actually.
Unless she wants to drive.
On mobile and tablet, download our free app for Apple and Android.
The event organisers wheel on 4 women in effectively their bra and knickers. What's that about?
Tune into Sky, Virgin Media, and now Freeview.
Surely the new politics is if you agree with somebody, you say so and you support them.
And get the whole picture through our website. website, lbc.co.uk. Leading Britain's conversation. Never miss a minute of LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 19 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Tom Bennett is with us, and poised also to talk to you directly, I should say, if you've got a question you want to put to the man. Charged with chairing a working group at Behaviour, looking at behaviour management, but it's also fair to say, Tom, that you are, it is hoped, going to be able to inject some serious improvement into the state of British classrooms. There's no point doing this working group without a goal.
Yeah, I hope so. What the goal is to produce recommendations for how teachers are trained.
Yes.
The whole thing about being called a czar is that people somehow think I'm going to set all the detentions for the next 6 months, which, feel free, send them all to me if you like.
Do detentions work while we're on the subject?
Well, detentions is one strategy. It can work.
Yes.
It's a tool. So do all tools work all the time? No, they don't. But do detentions and do deterrents deter most kids from misbehaving? Yeah, probably they do. We're not talking about anything which contravenes their Geneva rights. What we're talking about is something which just puts them in a place where they just don't want to come back to. And if that means a little bit of extra work after school, guess what? So be it. And I have no trouble with that.
It'll wash. The scepticism I have is built. I'll level with you. It's built upon the idea of anybody, yourself included, being able to look at a room of disparate adults, very different adults, 20 teachers, all with different skill sets, different physical presences, different enthusiasms, different intellects, different attributes, abilities, and of course different flaws as well. And you being able to give anything that could be construed or described as universal, to give every single one of them a tool or a tactic that would be valuable to all of them.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to identify that the enormous, staggering complexity of human relationships, and yet, there's also, to be fair, some general universals which can be teased out. I mean, you may as well say the same to a police officer, that there's no way you can train a police officer how to deal with the public. And that's essentially what you're doing. You're dealing with large groups of people. So what you do is you train people to deal in percentages. And the majority of people, and I'm counting children as part of that, right, will respond to being encouraged, praised, sometimes discouraged, deterred by other things, basic sanctions, basic rewards, and so on. And these things do really, really work in very strong sense.
And there are some people, of course, who are quite categorically unsuited to being in the police service. Presumably, presumably the same is true of teachers. You encounter people who've just backed the wrong horse.
Yeah, there's a lot. The vast majority of people in teaching are absolutely suited to it, because the selection process is usually such that it weeds out people who are, just not right for the job. Having said that,
what sets off your alarm bells? Anything in particular? I don't want to be your teacher, I want to be your friend, that sort of thing? Or?
Yeah, to be fair, that can usually be fixed.
Yes.
Because, a lot of teachers start off wanting to be the kid's friend until they realise, I would hope, that friendship isn't a relationship. It's an adult relationship. It's a teacher-student relationship, which is a very powerful and important one. After all, you don't go out with the students for a pint of lager. It's not a friend relationship. I mean, it's frowned upon, certainly. You don't ask them for cigarettes. So it's a completely different type of relationship. But the people that do think that usually learn fairly quickly. Oh, hang on, wait a minute. This isn't friendly,
So who won't? Who will be just wrong?
That's a tough one. I mean, teachers who go out thinking that they've got a right, or who enjoy, let's say, dominating people for its own sake. You have to go out there wanting the ultimate well-being of the child. The well-being of the child is your focus, their educational well-being and their safety. But if you're this kind of person who gets off on being in charge, who likes being in power, who likes dominating people, and it feeds their ego,
see, that's going to set off some alarms, isn't it? Because
but
it's not just Victorians who think you need that in classrooms. You need people who take charge, people who are disciplinarian.
Oh yeah, no. Being prepared to take charge is very different from enjoying it. Because if you enjoy it, you'll do it no matter what the end is. You'll do it for its own sake.
So tyrannical tendencies.
Yeah, absolutely. But then, to be fair, that's true of anybody.
I thought you were going to go the opposite way, Tom. I thought you were going to describe someone too soppy to me, but actually you're describing someone too strict, someone who gets a kick out of being strict. And
that would say, well, I think both would set my alarm bells off. But in terms of which one is easier to amend, I would say that the soppy person is probably easier to amend in terms of their behaviour once they realise that maybe you've got to set firmer boundaries. But somebody who enjoys discipline for its own sake and cracking a whip. That's a really hard thing to undermine. That's a really hard thing to dismantle.
How can you
somebody's
spot
character.
it? How can you tell if someone's in there?
Only through their behaviours. And I guess through kind of conversations you might have before going into the classroom. But again, most teacher training involves interview processes. And most teacher training involves that kind of, looking behind and looking for their motivations. And if the motivation isn't there, then they probably shouldn't be a teacher.
Yes, of course.
Because it's a vocation more than a job, I'd say.
Is it, you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is for you,
You've got to
clearly.
love it. But not just for me, because although we need thousands and thousands of teachers, and it's very, very hard to get really high quality numbers of teachers at that level, you've got to love it in some extent. You either got to love your subject or love working with kids, and preferably both.
Yes.
If you don't, you will not last. You'll do your 4 years, your 5 years, and you'll go, this isn't for me. And we don't want that. We want teachers to stay for 5, 10, 15 years and really hone their craft and then disseminate that to other teachers.
Indeed we do. And then, of course, there's financial implications as well of training people up for
Absolutely,
a profession
training
that
costs a
turn
lot
out
of
not
money,
to
yeah,
be suited
big
to. I should stress that Tom still teaches. You teach in Dagenham now. Previously, you taught in Tower Hamlets.
Yeah.
I'd be interested, and partly for personal reasons, what your view is on people who regularly tell me that the fact that their children are sharing a classroom with someone whose mother tongue isn't English is having a detrimental effect on their child's classroom. And Tower Hamlets must have been quite a good place to examine claims like that.
I mean, London is in general,
Well, indeed
absolutely.
it is,
You know,
yes.
London's got an extraordinary level of diversity, which is rarely seen outside of the major cities. I would argue it all depends on how the school is handling that situation. I've seen schools where there's 40, 50, 60 languages spoken as mother tongue. If the school is geared up to deal with EAL, English Additional Language issues, then that can be as smooth as any other classroom. If the school decides to do the wrong thing and just plonk the child into an English-speaking classroom and give them colouring in sheets, another issue. You know, that's a much more troubling issue, which
Yes.
is much more difficult as a teacher to unpick. But you just got to do what you got to do.
It's growing as well, I think, that unhappiness.
What, in terms of diversity or the negative
Well,
reaction to
it
it?
seems to be more permitted now to say things in public, but perhaps 5 years ago people would have been a little reluctant to admit to, I don't want my kid sharing a class with a Romanian child. or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that.
sure. It's funny, you know, because I've got two feelings about that. One feeling is that I like it when we have these conversations.
So do I.
Because because the less we have these conversations, the more ignorance can flourish, and the
course.
more, you know, let's be honest, quite negative attitudes can flourish. So I am for free speech.
Yes.
I'm very much for people being able to say that. And I'm glad that that's coming out in the open so that it can be addressed in conversation. But as long as people remember manners at all times.
Manners
but
at
that's
all
the teacher
times.
in me.
We say manners, others say political correctness. Can you pop your headphones on? Would you
Yeah,
mind?
sure.
Because there's a couple of people waiting to talk to you.
Are they in there? Yeah.
0345 6060 973. Let's start with Pascal, who's in Ealing. Pascal, I know you've got no interest at all in talking to me, so why not talk directly to Tom Bennett?
Okay, hi Tom.
Hi, Pascal.
Hi, I've just got a problem with my daughter. Now, earlier on, I was a bit, when she was probably about 3, 4, I was a bit more harsher with her in regards of, you know, rules and stuff like that and behaviour. I started working full-time and I was studying as well, and I wasn't able to keep to the discipline. Now
Sure.
she's grown, she's got so much strength, it's unbelievable. She will quote the law to me, you know, and stuff like that, and she'll, at the hint of a, you know, like reprimanding her, she'll cry instantly. She'll have excessive tantrums when I'm trying to get her to
How old
school.
is she now, Pascal?
She's 9.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, she's a really sweet girl with everybody else.
And you're beating yourself up here a bit, aren't you? You're thinking it's because I went back to work full time.
It was because I was studying, you know, I was studying law and I was working as well, and you know, doing other things. I was working, I was doing volunteering as well. So you know, I was studying at night, studying in the morning, plus I was working. So I wasn't able to keep up.
Yeah, sure. If I can just respond to that. Good question. In many ways, actually, it reminds me of what teachers face every day in the classroom. I'm going to pass on to you some wisdom that a very wise old owl said to me a few years ago. He said, children hate boundaries. He paused and then he said, children crave boundaries. And it's true, and it's a kind of paradox about human nature, that children, if you tell them to do something that they don't want to do, well, guess what? You know, they're not going to want to do it simply because they're human beings. None of us want to really do what we don't want to do.
Yeah.
But children actually ultimately feel much safer when they know that there are lines that they're not supposed to cross. They really do. And I've dealt with some really, really challenging children who have come back to me years later after school saying, I appreciated the way you spoke to me. I appreciated you drawing lines.
I mean, I understand it because I was pretty rebellious when I was young, and I loved the teachers who were quite, harsh because I saw the boundaries.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And the hardest thing is, and this is the hardest thing for a parent and a child, and I say that as a parent of a 2-year-old child, when they start to kick off and throw the tantrums, that's them pushing back against your boundaries. And the hardest thing in the world is just to let them do it. But you kind of have to let them just exhaust themselves, and you have to show that you are going to outlast them. And if you do that often enough, they learn a different lesson. They learn the lesson that your boundaries are not going to move, so their boundaries have to move instead.
So do I just let her cry?
Well, potentially.
Or, like, bang the walls?
Oh, gosh, I mean, if it comes to a point where, she's in danger of hurting herself, obviously you may have to
not
intervene.
hurting herself, but just, like banging the wall on purpose.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, what you're describing there is almost like an extended 2-year-old's tantrum. But I see this in my classrooms too, when children just stomp their feet because they're not allowed to sit where they want to sit. And you got to just let them blow the storm out. I mean, what I do in a school is I'll take them out of the classroom so that it doesn't disturb the other kids. But if you're in a one-on-one situation, what I suggest you do is you just say, look, that's the way it is. Mummy still loves you, but that's the way it is, and I'm not going to back down on this, so come back to me when you're ready.
So what about when it kicks off if I don't allow her to get a nice scream because we've already got something at the shop?
Yeah.
And she just goes, wah!
I would suggest, oh God, I know the feeling.
I think we all do.
Yeah, sure. There's a million people nodding right now.
Yes.
I'm going to suggest toughing it out. Because I tell you what, the more you tough it out, the easier it will become, because you'll get used to it, because right now it's so painful because you're seeing somebody you love looking upset. But eventually they'll learn not to do that, because they're doing it as a strategy to get what they want. She can see that by doing that she gets what she wants. If you can teach her that she won't do it, she'll stop doing it, and eventually you won't have to do it. It's like when I set detentions in classrooms. If I set them often enough, children know they're going to get detention, so I don't need to set them anymore. So you kind of get there eventually, and it's for her good. But I appreciate how hard that is.
Well, we all do, Pascal. I don't think anyone needs to tell you that you're not alone on this one. I'm interested that you're a dad yourself. Was that your first child is too?
Yeah, it's my first child, and I tell you what, that's a different angle to come at.
Come into that after the news, because it's 12:31 now. Rupert Bhatia has the headlines.
The Home Secretary's arrived on the Tunisian beach where dozens of people were killed in Friday's terror attack. 17 British tourists are known to be amongst them, but that figure is expected to rise to more than 30 as more victims are identified. Around 400 counter-terror officers are being stationed at airports here as people fly home from Tunisia. Lord Janner will now face prosecution over child sex offence charges. The Director of Public Prosecutions has ruled the former Labour MP, who's previously denied the claims, should face no action because he's suffering from Alzheimer's, but that decision has now been reversed. Cash withdrawals in Greece have been limited at €60 a day. Banks in the country will remain closed for the next week as Greece edges closer to leaving the Eurozone. The country is due to make a €1.7 billion repayment to the IMF tomorrow. If it doesn't, it will default. And the Airports Commission will release its recommendation on whether a new runway should be built at Heathrow or Gatwick Airport on Wednesday. LBC weather. A dry day with good sunny spells in London and the southeast, feeling warm, a high of 24 Celsius. A similar picture across much of the rest of England, more cloud over Wales and the far west, overcast in Scotland and Northern Ireland. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Rupert Bhatia.
This is LBC.
Whether you're a butcher, baker, bar owner, jeweller, architect, mechanic, cat groomer, IT consultant, malt producer, tree chopper, bespoke dog suit maker, exotic fruit seller, onesie tailor or pig breeder, employers across the UK, however small the business, will soon have to provide a workplace pension, even if you employ just one person. It's the law. Act now and find out when this affects you. Search the Pensions Regulator. Workplace pensions. We're all in. The Pensions Regulator is empowered by the UK government to regulate workplace pensions.
The big presentation's ready and the lunch date's booked, but you're worried it's your missing teeth that are going to get all the attention. For a natural appearance and function, fixed dental implant solutions with Darwood & Tanner are often the best restorative option for missing teeth. Even if you've been told you have insufficient bone for dental implants, they could still help you. Speak to Darwood & Tanner on 08448 112 926 to arrange a consultation, or visit whenyousmile.com.
You took a risk and asked her to dance. You took the plunge and asked her to marry you.
Life isn't about whether you take a risk, but whether the risk is worth the reward. Rate setters reap the rewards by cutting out the middleman to get a better return. Your capital is at risk, but then earning nothing is not an option, especially when it comes to investing your money. Search Rate Setter and make today pay. Rate Setter is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority.
This is the sound of an ordinary long-stay parking space. This is the sound of a Heathrow long-stay parking space.
Can I help you?
Because a Heathrow space has everything to help your holiday take off. Transfer shuttles every 10 minutes. Helpful free airporters on board.
Can I help you?
Average 10 minutes to your terminal. All from £6.20 a day at heathrow.com/parking.
Heathrow, making every journey better. Price relates to 2 weeks in a long-stay car park booked in advance for stays completed by 14th of September. Subject to availability, conditions apply.
Employers across the UK, however small the business, will soon have to provide a workplace pension. It's the law. Act now. Search the Pensions Regulator. Workplace pensions. We're all in.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. Tom Bennett is with me, the man who has been appointed to chair a working group looking at behaviour management. The aim is, sadly, not to fix every classroom in the country by tea time today, but rather to find tools, identify means by which all teachers and potential teachers can improve their ability to control a classroom. And in Newham, you have to control a classroom, but in circumstances that are not necessarily being addressed by anything Tom has said so far. Tell us what's going on there.
Yes, good morning, James. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Yes, I'm a supply teacher. My specialism is languages.
Yeah.
And often I'm given the charge of secondary school pupils for one day, occasionally 1 week. And, of course, behaviour tends to be horrendous. And based on what you've said this morning, how would I be able to take control on short-term occasions such as a daily supply?
Great question. Can I just say, supply teachers are some of the noblest people in the entire teaching profession, because they are the SAS of teachers. And you know what? Sometimes it breaks my heart when I see how badly some schools, not all, but some schools can treat the supply teachers almost like an afterthought or a sticking plaster. The best schools support the supply teachers and value them, so I massively endorse that. What I recommend for any supply teacher going into a situation like this, and it's a question I get asked quite a lot, is you've only got, say, you might have a lesson or you might have a morning or an afternoon with them, so you don't have long to build up these relationships that I'm talking about. So what you have to do is, the first, most basic thing is let them know that you do have boundaries, let them know that you have expectations of them, that you're not just there as, just the supply teacher, which of course is the awful kind of dogma that many children have about supply teachers.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done supply lessons, and I've even done a little bit of supply work, and you've got to go in and say to them, right guys, we're going to have a good lesson today. I expect lots from you. I've got work for you to do, and I expect it to be done. And here are my basic principles that I need you to follow. I need you to listen to me. I need you to listen to each other. I need you to try your hardest. If you do that, we'll be fine. If you don't, we're going to have some issues, and I will follow up on it. A supply teacher should know, when they go into the school, the name of somebody whom they can then refer to if there are any behaviour issues. A supply teacher should hopefully know the behaviour policy of the school and what to do if they need to send a child out, for example. Some basic things like that. It's difficult at first, but if you do the same schools time and time again, you'll eventually get to know what the situation is. But if you walk alone, as many supply teachers do, then you're as powerful as your own voice, which is to say, not often, not very. But if you enlist the assistance of the school and really make the school help you, really kick up a fuss and say, that pupil disrupted this lesson, I needed them out, or that pupil called me this name, I need something to happen to them. If you make, you can really make that happen. It's difficult. Managing upwards is always difficult. But good schools will already reach out to supply teachers and give them seating plans and tell them whom to contact and so on. But if that doesn't happen, you have to make that happen.
Okay, great, thanks.
Good luck.
And before you go, how long have you been a teacher?
For 3 years.
Okay, and are you surprised that advice and help like that which Tom proffers is not available more during the training process or when you're doing your PGCE?
Yeah, most definitely. I think.
So I'm staggered as a parent, Anne. I've got to tell you.
I think, as Tom said, I think people assume you have a magic bullet and everything will be okay, and in fact it's not okay. And I left mainstream teaching because of the behaviour problems.
That's tough.
Yeah, many do. I mean, I forget the exact figures, but I hear something like 1 in 5 teachers leave within the first 5 years because of behaviour. That's a massive. That's a massive loss. To the not just to the economy, but to the teachers' own lives,
Yes,
let alone
of
to the
course.
children's lives in terms of the disruption they have.
And it's not simple what you're saying, but it is sort of a pudding that you've proved. I mean, this is stuff that you've learnt at the chalk face, as it were.
Yeah, and this is stuff. I mean, I've been in over 100 schools, and I've been asked thousands and thousands of questions on the Vice forums and so on. And the scary thing is how similar many of the problems are. You know?
Well, let me run something by you.
Sure.
Because regular listeners to this programme will have heard this story, like they've heard all my stories, more times than anyone wants to remember. But I did a bit of mentoring work in a school in South London some years ago now, and I found it an upsetting experience because I thought I'll march in there with my middle-class sensibilities and drop a few bombs about my proficiency at video games, and I'll be turning around a whole generation of delinquents and turning them into proper little young conservatives. And I saw one thing that's always stayed with me, and it was the lad that I got on very well with him, and I think I did do a little bit of good in his life. But I saw him in a classroom, and he didn't know I could see. And he was just standing in front of a female teacher, Tom, and he was about 2 feet away from her. He was bigger than her, and she was telling him to go and sit down, and he just wasn't moving. And that probably was the point at which I realised I could never be a teacher.
Well, I disagree with you. You probably could. You probably just needed a bit more time. What you've described there is at the heart of probably one of the biggest fears of most people before or even during when they go into education, which is what happens if they say no. You know, that's essentially it, you know, because a lot of people walk into the classroom thinking that they, or certainly a lot of people outside of the profession think that teachers have got, you know, the Jedi mind trick. You know, and they just wave their hand, and obviously
because we all had a teacher who did.
Well, we
think we did,
but they didn't. What they had was a relationship with you. Now they might have got that relationship because you were the kind of child who naturally listened to adults because you came from that kind of home and background. So you automatically gave that kind of deference to them. Or it might have been that over a period of time you realised that the teacher cared about you, had boundaries, wouldn't stand for nonsense and so on. And so eventually you just did as you were asked because you kind of knew it was in your own interest and because you knew it was just the way things were done. You got into a habit of it. But if you've got a child like that, and you know, that's such a common thing, you know, move your seat. No. Where'd you go next?
Yeah.
And of course, where you go next is you ask them again and again, and you repeat it, because sometimes you can just wear a child down just by saying, right, no, you really need to do this. Or you can give them what's called a language of choice. If you don't move, then I'm going to have to, you know, get someone to take you out of the room and so on. And then the child can make the choice for themselves. But ultimately, what a lot of teachers don't realise initially is that a lot of your behaviour management is done outside of the classroom. You may not be able to fix things there and then, but you then do work before and after the lesson. So, for example, a child like that, what you do is, let's say they just repeatedly refuse.
Yeah.
So all you can do then at that point is, rather than give the rest of the class, you know, the Muppet Show to watch, get somebody to take that child out. Chances are they won't be dragged kicking and screaming. Chances are they'll go with a snarl and maybe a curse, and then they'll walk out. Although obviously physically, sometimes regrettably, in very extreme situations, you'd have to do that. But you get the child out of the classroom, so at least then you can carry on with your lesson. And then what you do is you follow up, and you enlist the support of the school, and you get the parents involved, and you discuss that behaviour, and you tell them why it's unacceptable. And you might have some kind of consequence, some kind of sanction attached to that, which they don't like. Or it might be a counselling session, or whatever. There's a million different ways it could go. But what the child needs to know is that every time they do something like that, something will happen. If you take that consequence away, children really quickly do the maths and work out, it's no problem for me to misbehave. But if they know that they're going to have to go through some kind of rigmarole afterwards, they do a different type of maths, and they think, you know what, it's actually more in my interest just to get along with the rest of the class. And eventually it becomes habit, and then that habit becomes part of their character. So you do kind of very slowly change people. It takes a long time, though.
Well, there's a clue in the title, teacher, isn't there, I suppose. Let's hear from Margaret next in Eltham. Margaret, good afternoon. What would you like to say?
Hi. I've been listening really well, I think. Listening to the lesson.
Are you sitting up?
Ex-teacher. I'm sitting down, yes.
Yes.
And I'd like to say there's another thing that we need to do, I think, particularly in secondary schools, and that is have a hierarchy that works from the senior staff, that works before school and after school, so that parents can be pulled in fairly fast. So they are given the opportunity of arriving at school early in the morning or after school time, and a very senior member of staff whose job it is to be dealing with disciplinary problems, I think, is able to see parents very quickly after serious problems. There are people who say, no, I won't.
I couldn't agree more. I am amazed when I see schools not setting aside enough discrete staff time for these kind of issues. I wish every school had a system whereby all of the senior staff were timetabled into being exclusively available to deal with these kind of incidents. Whether that be by doing corridor sweeps and patrols, which is sometimes very, very necessary, just to keep an eye out and make sure all the classrooms are being run properly, but also to be available to speak to parents and have those kind of really essential meetings, because those kind of relationship building meetings, whether it be punitive or rewarding or whatever, are absolutely vital to this kind of equation. If the school doesn't have time to follow up with behaviour management, then it gets ignored. And the children learn really quickly, and this is another lesson you don't want them to learn, that they can pretty much get away with what they want. And children are children, you know, even the nice ones will try and get away with, you know,
of course
cheeky
they will.
stuff.
What about parents? Margaret mentions the parents. What about, I mean, there's that classic cartoon, and again, I don't know how accurate it is, whereas in the 1970s you called in some parents to tell them their kids' exam results were bad, and the parents would tell the kid off, and now in the 2015 you call in the parents, tell them the exam results were bad, and the parents start telling the teacher off. I mean, it might be a nugget, a kernel of truth.
There is, like every caricature, there's an element of truth in that. You do get some parents like that, particularly. The parent is your secret weapon when it comes to behaviour management in terms of a school, because let's face it, 99% of parents love and know their children far more than you ever will. You know, and a lot of teachers, some teachers often forget that the children don't just come into the classroom fully formed, you know, springing from nothing, that they drag their whole lives with them. And so we have to take that into account. And one of the things I often recommend new teachers to do with new classes, call up the parents of a new class before you need to. Phone them up and just say, hi, this is Mr. Bennett, I'll be teaching Billy religious studies or whatever for the next 6 months. Give me a shout if you need me. I look forward to teaching your child. You know, with that kind of conversation, that just doesn't happen. And what you do is you build up an emotional bank account.
But it never did, Tom, so we're kind of, I think, conducting the conversation on the basis that things are worse now than they used to be. I don't know if you are, I am.
I don't know if they're, I genuinely don't know if they're worse, simply because I don't have figures to substantiate that.
Can you? It's not a comparison you can make.
I've been teaching for 12 years. I wouldn't say it's any worse or any better, particularly when it comes to behaviour management. All I know and care about is that there's a problem that needs to be addressed.
Yes.
You know, and we fight it as long and hard as we can. Certainly, some parents have got much higher expectations of, or perhaps I could even say wrong expectations of what is expected from a school, that they treat it more like a service, like a supermarket.
Yes.
You know, like, you know, why hasn't my child got an A? And the answer may well be because your child, you know...
Go on, say it.
Your child isn't working very hard.
All right, then.
There you go.
Or your child, however hard they work, will never get an A, because that's the nature of a rigorous examination system, is that you can't...
Well, it would depend on the baseline. I would say everybody can get an A eventually, but it depends what you're prepared to put into it.
Yes, of course. Talking of which, I can't believe it. The hour's almost over. If you're making me interested in a subject, I thought that's about the biggest compliment you can pay a teacher, isn't it?
I can die happy.
It's 12:47. Don't do that yet.
I'm Joanne Webb in the LBC Travel Centre. Well, a couple of problems on the M25. Firstly, anti-clockwise, very slow from junction 6 at Godson to the M26, and that's because of an accident where one lane is closed for recovery. Now, a lorry's overturned on the roundabout with the M25 and the A1M, so that's the South Mims roundabout. It means you can't leave the clockwise M25 at junction 23. Kennington Park Road is still closed in both directions between the Oval and Kennington Tube Station, and that's because of a burst water main. There's still a load of water all over the road. There are long delays around Vauxhall and Stockwell. And in Southwark, there's been an accident on Southwark Street. It's eastbound between Blackfriars Road and Hopton Street. There are queues all the way back to London Bridge and back to Waterloo Bridge. Better news on the Underground. Those delays on the Central Line have cleared. But on the trains, there are delays on southeastern services between Charlton and Dartford on the Woolwich Line. Keeping London moving. Your next travel update's in half an hour.
This is LBC.
On average, 2 people over 65 die in a house fire every week. Please test their smoke alarms regularly. Fire kills. You can prevent it.
Remembering every phone number you've ever called is not impressive. What is impressive is remembering to call 118434 whenever you need a number. 118434. It's the handy number for handy numbers.
Calls cost 76p, plus £1.53 per minute from a BT landline. Other networks vary, and mobiles cost considerably more.
We all like to splash out on holiday, relaxing and living a life of luxury. But you don't need to start the big spend getting to the airport. Just Airports is an affordable, hassle-free chauffeur service, exclusive to servicing London's airports, in style. You can get a quote and book online at justairports.com, via the Just Airports app, or by calling 0208 900 1666. Justairports.com. Spend your money out there, not getting there.
Tradesman. Direct Line will beat any public liability insurance quote for the same cover. Can your insurance do that? Search Direct Line Public Liability Insurance. New customers only. Qualifying criteria apply. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
This is the sound of an ordinary long-stay parking space. This is the sound of a Heathrow long-stay parking space.
Can I help you?
Because a Heathrow space has everything to help your holiday take off. Transfer shuttles every 10 minutes. Helpful free airporters on board.
Can I help you?
Average 10 minutes to your terminal. All from £6.20 a day at heathrow.com/parking.
Heathrow, making every journey better. Price relates to 2 weeks in a long stay car park booked in advance for stays completed by 14th of September. Subject to availability, conditions apply.
Hello. Come in, Sue. The gas man's just leaving. Bye, Derek.
I had British Gas round last week too. My engineer was so thorough.
Oh, I bet he wasn't as good as mine.
He called to say when he'd arrive.
Mine fixed the boiler in a jiffy.
Mine was so tidy.
Mine assembled my flat pack dining table and 6 chairs.
Really?
No, I made that one up.
To find out why 9 out of 10 of our surveyed home care customers would recommend us, call 0800 975 0999 or search British Gas.
Bar stools, office chairs, shelving, whiteboards, plastic boxes, cleaning trolleys, can't deliver racking. Lockers and ladders, lockers and ladders. Kick steps, pallet trucks, safes and stackers, archive boxes, office.
AJ Products has over 15,000 products for office, school, warehouse and industry. You will find surprisingly more at ajproducts.co.uk.
Stay where you are. Just accept your lot. But when you do nothing, you get nothing. Rate setters, however, do plenty. They cut out the middleman to get better returns on their money. They know capital is at risk, but then what in life is guaranteed? Having nothing is not an option. Do something. Get the return you deserve. Search RateSetter and make today pay. RateSetter is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority.
Coming up at 1 on LBC, Sheila Fogarty.
David Cameron says we need to fight Islamic State on every front. So why aren't we in Iraq in greater numbers?
Leading Britain's conversation, Sheila Fogarty. This afternoon from 1 on LBC.
12:51. Absolutely loving listening to Tom Bennett. Every school should have a Mr. Bennett. What a fascinating guest that Mr. James O'B has on at the moment. Nice to hear real common sense for a change. And Joe says, I think all teachers should have a Glaswegian accent. So you're winning.
I'm not actually from Glasgow.
Well,
I just put it on.
Print the legend. Take a couple more calls. Tom, you'll be delighted to hear. We'll no doubt be returning. We've just discussed it in the break at some point subsequently, so don't worry too much if you haven't had your voice heard. Let's go to Wimbledon. Alex is there. Alex, what made you pick up the phone this afternoon?
Well, I'll give you some context. I'm a security officer. I left the army in 2003, and I train security officers in conflict management and how to communicate with people to get a positive outcome. My question was, I'm sure Tom's doing it in looking as wide as he can at all the options, but the specific training with regard to bad behaviour and how conflict management is being put to teachers, is it a one-day-a-year affair, or are they getting further training that's more in-depth?
Mate, I wish it was one day a year. I wish that we're getting that much. I know teachers, and I'm kind of pointing my finger at me here, who got 1 hour of a behaviour management lecture in my entire teacher training. 1 hour. This is what I'm railing against, and this is what I've been kind of writing about for many years. You're absolutely right to point the finger at conflict management. You can anticipate a lot of poor behaviour, and you can head it off by creating routines and structures, which means that it's less likely for children to misbehave. If you've got, for instance, a child that you know is addicted to chucking a pen about the classroom, then you make sure you've got eyes on that class as much as possible. For example, you don't put natural antagonists together and so on and so forth, and you try and resolve it. If you see something start to kick off, you get in there immediately, before it becomes something that you need to stop kicking off, and things like that. And I think actually there's a lot of lessons to be learned from in the teaching profession from other professions when it comes to things like how you speak to people. It's one of the things that you pick up on the job if you're lucky and you've got a great trainer. But I'd love it if more people were trained to deal with these kind of things. I mean, remember when I used to run nightclubs in Soho, I had a fantastic security guy called Marius, and he never got involved in a fight in the whole 5 years I knew him because he didn't have to, because he always talked them down. He always knew what to say, and he always knew how to anticipate who the troublemakers would be and who they wouldn't be. Now, I'm not advising that teachers become bouncers, but there's a lot of that in what we do.
We, as a company, we instituted the use of the verbal judo techniques from the States.
I love that.
And we saw a 99% reduction in physical conflict. 90%.
Really?
Give me an idiot's guide to verbal judo, Alex.
Well, verbal judo is a system where we, instead of trying to go force to force, so authority against disorder, we persuade.
Okay. So, but the judo analogy is the sort of the subtlety of it rather than the violence.
Yeah, it's judo is the gentle way in Japanese.
Exactly.
And that's what it means. It's all about redirection and making people come over to your way.
Are you a dad?
I am. Yeah, I've got twin girls. Yeah.
Do you twins?
Yeah.
And training in conflict management.
Well,
do the two worlds ever collide?
My daughter's, funnily enough, my daughter's teacher said to me about 6 weeks ago, "Do you train your daughters in psychology?" At which point I said yes, because it stops them getting bullied. One of my daughters is a high-functioning ASC sufferer, and her behaviour's come along massively simply because I use this model all the time, you see.
I think that's absolutely fascinating.
It is actually.
Alex should be on your committee, shouldn't
he?
Yeah, that experience. Alex, thank you, mate. It's 12:55. You mentioned that you became a dad yourself 2 years ago. Has that changed any of your attitudes? Because I have this theory, and I shouldn't. I've waited until the end to lay this on.
I'm off. Taxi's running.
If you look back at your childhood, the adults or the parents actually who thought they had all the answers were the ones that were actually buying they could tell everybody else's children what to do and how to behave and tell all the other parents what they were doing wrong. And I know that's not your modus operandi, but has becoming a dad yourself changed your working outlook?
I'm going to stick my neck out here and say not significantly, although it makes me a lot more sympathetic to what was it Frida, the lady earlier on?
Pascal, was it?
Pascal, sorry.
That's it.
Who had the issues with the child having a tantrum. I mean, I've got a 2-year-old daughter who throws tantrums.
Welcome.
Now, this little girl is the centre of my universe. You know, if I've ever thought there'd be anything which I love more than teaching, I wouldn't have expected it, but there it is, parenthood. And when she throws a tantrum, every ounce of my heart just wants to make her happy.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that.
You know, and
I'm so glad
you feel like such a bad person for saying, no, you can't have your fifth Jaffa cake for
She's
breakfast.
Crying, and my job is to stop her crying.
She doesn't love me anymore.
No.
But you realise you've got to tough that out slightly. I've never found too much of a problem with that in the classroom situation.
Sure.
Because it's much more conscious, and you know.
The bond is different.
And the bond is different. You can dislocate yourself a little bit more. You're much more professional. But when it's somebody you love unreservedly, I can see the issue there. So it makes me understand parents a little bit more. But, you know, the principles are still pretty much the same.
I want to squeeze in Sue in Watford, but we're short of time, and Sheila Fogarty is back from her travels, Sue. So if you could just put your point to Tom as briefly as you can.
Okay, morning to you both.
Morning.
My question would be, having been in the teaching profession, why is Ofsted so frightened of imaginative and innovative teaching?
Well, that's a big question for 30 seconds. What I will say is that
you can have a minute.
Under the tutelage of someone like Michael Wilshaw, who took over a few years ago, Ofsted have now explicitly said that they are not expecting a particular style of teaching. You can teach in any way you see fit, as long as the children are learning. Now, how you define that is another quandary, but most schools will make that decision for themselves, and Ofsted will then inspect what the schools say about it. So it's become a bit less prescriptive from Ofsted, and long may that continue.
But you recognise the reality of what Sue describes, but things are moving in the right direction.
Oh, it's been awful, I have to say.
Has it really?
Yeah, there used to be a preferred Ofsted style. And Ofsted would deny it, but there was. And there's not anymore. But inspectors would come and bring in their own prejudices about what a good lesson looked like. And that might be all singing, all dancing, group work, dancing bears, holograms and so on.
When do you deliver? When do you
When do I what,
When
sir?
do you deliver your? I mean, when the committee. When,
I see.
when is your work complete?
Sorry, my wife is pregnant again, so I thought you were talking about that. And I won't do that personally anyway.
Well,
we're looking at
fate.
kind of a Christmas delivery date, but we're just finalising that right now. But it's a fairly fast turnaround.
It clearly is.
Yeah, we'll
Well,
see.
I hope you can squeeze us in before then.
Love to.
Tom Bennett, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. It really has.
Pleasure
Thank you
to be
so
here.
much indeed. Time is just approaching 12:59. We'll do it all again tomorrow morning from 10 on.